Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Shane from 3RRR's science radio program, Einstein A Go-Go. Over the last few weeks, I've been advocating wherever possible for teachers and school staff who are concerned about returning to school without all of the COVID mitigation strategies in place on the first day. Today, we're putting out this special video. I'll be speaking to a psychologist about the mental health aspects of that transition for everyone involved in schools. This discussion is designed to give some initial supporting ideas around this area. It is absolutely not a substitute for proper clinical support. At this point, I'd like to introduce Emma-Rose Parsons, who is a psychologist from Spectrum House and will be my counterpart in this discussion. Hi, Emma. Rose, how are you going?
I'm good, thanks, Shane. I'm very well.
Now, it's great to have you here to talk about this, because I think what you and I have both been experiencing, you in your professional capacity, mine as just someone on Twitter who's trying to help a few teachers out, is a huge outpouring of concern, anxiety, and in some cases, actual fear with regards to the workplace environment that our teachers are going back into. And we wanted to sort of talk a bit about that. Give us a bit of a feeling. What have you been seeing? You've been talking to a lot of teachers, people from various aspects of the schooling environment. What have you been seeing?
It's really interesting, Shane. I've been able to reach out to a number of different teaching professionals, from those who are in the government sector through to the Catholic and the independent schools, and both teachers and in leadership. And I think that the nuts and bolts summary would be best described just as an anxiety response. I think the significant level of unknowns that we're about to embark on have left our teaching teams feeling quite unsure of what's going to happen and what the plans are that are going to protect not just themselves, because teachers are really into teaching because they really care about students and student welfare. So I think they are very concerned about what this might look like for their students and the welfare of their students returning to school.
Talk us through what that looks like, this type of anxiety condition, because my experience with it myself, having various events in my life, is that it can take many different forms for different people. So what sort of things should people be looking out for?
Well, I think the challenge here, Shane, is that it's quite multi-layered. So there's anxiety or concern around things like health, physical health. There's anxiety around their mental health of teaching teams, of their students. There's concern around the disconnect that's happened over the last couple of years, and trying to re-engage these students in wanting to be at school. So feeling confident and safe enough to get out there. So there's so many layers. So what does it look like? Well, it's looking like a lot of different things. I think fear can present in a number of different ways. It can look like anger. It can look like people getting quite withdrawn, or can be very vocal. It can look like people getting upset about things they typically wouldn't get so stressed about or wouldn't see as such big deals, but all of a sudden their ability to cope with more minor, day in, day out sort of concerns are all of a sudden seeming like they're very big concerns, very big deals. So it can present quite differently. Some people tend to kind of go to ground and they don't want to communicate. Some people really desperately need to talk it out. So I think the challenge we have here is this same sort of underlying concern is presenting in a lot of different ways.
And how normalized are these discussions with regards to the sort of teachers and school staff? And we shouldn't forget those. And we shouldn't also forget all the early learning centers and daycare centers. I mean, there's a lot of people involved in this space, so I want to sort of include all of those. But how normalized are these discussions in that community? Because I know in the sort of workforces I've been in myself in the past, this just wasn't something that was really openly discussed, and it was very difficult to get support as a result.
Look, I think it's changed a lot. I think the way that we discuss mental health concerns has changed a lot over the last decade, particularly, where it is more normalized than it was to talk about how you're feeling. However, I think that people are also a bit sick of hearing how that I'm feeling worried and feeling stressed, and people are sick of saying it. So I think there's a fatigue in talking about mental health, and it almost has got to the point where, you say mental health and people have a bit of a reaction. I don't want to know, it's too tricky. And it's vague. It's very difficult to have a single way of managing mental health. So it's quite a complex, layered situation. It's not clear cut in the way that you approach it. So it's different schools seem to have quite different cultures, where some schools it's really advocated that you talk about it. How are you feeling? Some schools seem to have a bit of an approach of, tell me how you're feeling, then I'm going to tell you how to feel happy, rather than just go, okay, it's okay to not feel happy right now, so what do you need to kind of go with that current feeling. Where some schools it seems to be a more of the, shush, you need to just do your job, and focus on your students and not on yourself, and which is just not helpful.
Yeah. Now, at the extreme end of things, I've received quite a number of messages, you may have as well, from teachers and staff concerned to the point where they're even considering leaving their profession. And one of the things I remember, that old story from your mother when you're growing up is, don't make decisions when you're angry or really upset. And I think at the moment, though, people are in such a continual phase of being in this state that they are presented with this difficult scenario of choice. I mean, what are your recommendations around that with regards to how to make decisions when we're feeling this way?
Oh, it's such a hard one, I think, at the moment, Shane, because people are so burnt out. I think that essentially we've had a Christmas holidays, summer holidays just been, and so many of the teachers that I've spoken to haven't taken a holiday. They've stayed at home, have done a variation of a quarantine to try and mitigate the risk to themselves and then to their students when they do return to school. So I think that people are not rested, that they haven't had that joyful summer holidays that so many people need to be refreshed, so that they've got the energy and the enthusiasm and they're invigorated, ready to go back to what they were passionate about. I think the big question comes back to, why did they get into teaching in the first place? And most teachers get into teaching because they actually thoroughly enjoy watching children grow and learn and develop and find their own passion for learning. And so when we talk about, how do you make decisions in this time, I think you first have to come back to the why. What is it that got you into teaching? And can you find that why again? Because if you can't find that, that's probably where we need to start with, okay, well, what do we need to do to get you back to that point where you can remember why you got into teaching in the first place?
Is it worth, I suppose, asking teachers in that position to wherever possible reach out to their colleagues and talk that through, because most of them are in a very similar, it's that scenario, we're all on the same ocean in different boats, and it's slightly different for everyone, but many of them have come in with the exact same passion you speak of, and in a way that has been slowly but surely sort of degraded over a period of time due to stress and other factors. So, but presumably collectively, talking that out would be a valuable way to go.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to have this conversation of what can we do to support each other, and one teacher talking to another teacher or talking to their leadership team about, hey, I need to find my why again, and I'm feeling exhausted, and what can I do to find that why again, I think would be an incredibly powerful starting point.
Now, in terms of sort of what to do, though, Emma-Rose, in terms of ways to deal with stress and anxiety at the moment, and one of the things I suppose a lot of people are aware of, it's very easy when the cause of stress and anxiety is removed, and we can slowly rebuild our mental health and how we're feeling, and we can go and do things we enjoy and so forth. But at the moment, it seems a little bit difficult because the sort of driver is just continually there, and in some senses, you might say it's getting worse, and there's a bit of an approaching storm. So, what are your recommendations in terms of what teachers can do at the moment? We're a week out when we're recording this from the start of school, and it's a pretty stressful time.
So yeah, it's interesting. I think there are so many unknowns that what happens is we tend to focus on that. So we tend to focus on what's scary, what's unknown, what's worrying coming up, rather than what do we know, what do we have in our bag of tricks that we can use to get through this stress. And I think that that's a really important thing to do. So I think it's important to stop and say, okay, what do I know? What do I have that's working for me? What can I access in terms of support, in terms of what works for me personally, as well as what works for me professionally, to get me where I need to go. So I think we need to change our focus point a little bit so that it's a bit more balanced, so that we don't have all of our headspace in that unknown, scary, worrying headspace, and we can actually just, even if they're minute, right? I mean, I know that I'm going to still need to pack my lunch. I know what time I still need to leave my house. I know what I need to take with me. I know what the curriculum is that I need to teach. I've got a fairly strong idea about who's going to be in my class and who these, characters are that I'm going to be working with for the next year. And there's quite a lot you do know. So perhaps focusing on those things would be a good start, rather than hyper focusing on the things that we don't know that create anxiety and stress.
Is it worth sort of literally listing those down? I mean, we often sort of
Oh,
joke about this, but I think there's
yeah,
some real value in writing these things
yeah,
down
yeah.
as reminders.
Absolutely. I fully support the idea of grabbing an A4 bit of paper, creating two columns. This is what I know, this is what I don't know. And I think that the more we do that, the more we remember, actually, I know a lot. And there's a lot of knowns in this environment. I know which classroom I'm going to be in. I know all those things. So grabbing a pen and creating that list can actually help you to clarify the current situation. That's less emotive. It's more factual.
Mm.
And I think that
So I was going to say, is it worth doing the same thing around things you can control and things you can't?
Oh, for sure. So there's a lot you can control. There's a lot we can control right now. Sure, there's also a lot we can't control right now, but there's actually a lot we can. We can choose what goes in our lunch order. We can choose what we wear in the morning. We can choose which mask we take with us. We can choose what we focus on, and we can choose what we choose not to focus on as well. So we can say, look, these are the things I actually need to pause. I need to stop this information coming into my life for a little while. I need to have a rest from some of it. These are the things, this is the information I want to be coming into my life. So whether it's data, whether it's things we can control in terms of our routines or our daily activities, those things can make us feel much better than putting all of our energy into these are the things I have absolutely no control over, because that may not change.
I mean, I know one of the things I do a lot of is teach people how to publicly present, how to give good speeches and presentations. And one of the first things I tell them is that the mind is excellent at remembering all the failures and bad things that we've done, and is
Yep.
really, really bad at reminding us of all our successes and things we've done well.
Mm.
How do we go about sort of shifting that needle so that we are better at remembering some of the successes and things that have worked out for us, especially over recent months, even in term 4, where it wasn't perfect, but it's done. We got through it,
Yeah.
and it did exhaust a lot of people. But how do we shift that needle towards
Well,
the
I
good
think
stuff?
I think part of that, Shane, comes down to an expectation that the only way we can get joy is by having these major joys. So, we may not have had graduations, we may not have had, the local inter-school sports, we may not have had camp, we may not have had these big things.
Mm.
But I think then it's uh, a bit of a concern if we stop looking for the mini joys that we've had. So I love the term of mini joys. I love the fact that there was an opportunity for some class hilarity over, who did what funny thing on Zoom last year, or, those mini joys of we all got to be in the classroom together for a little while, and we got to actually have a game of duck, duck, goose, or we got to celebrate such and such's birthday in the classroom, because we did still have some periods of time of normalcy, of just little joyful moments in the day, of being able to see one of your students have that aha moment, have that little light bulb moment they may not have otherwise had. You got to see that. So we have to remember those mini joys. We have to remember the things that still made last year worthwhile and empowering and good.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember years ago, I started a program called the Telescopes in Schools program, where we put some research grade telescopes into some of the low SES schools around the city. And I still remember a couple of moments where some of the students first saw Saturn through the telescope, and you hear them just breathe in deeply. It's just for a moment, and those little points of joy, like that stuck with me for a decade. When those first kids started doing that, and I think if we can hold on to those a bit better than we do some of the problems,
Yeah.
it can really fuel us for a while.
Yeah.
Emma-Rose, we're about to enter a transition.
Mm,
We've gone through a holiday period of really a huge amount of unknowns for
mm,
teachers and school staff and parents and kids as well, where we don't know what was going to happen, what the plan was going to look like. And that plan has only just been released, literally minutes before we did this recording on Sunday, the 23rd of January. But we're about to enter this period of change where we're going from, before school starts into the very start of school under a very, there's a very large COVID caseload at the moment in
mm.
many states. What are we going to look for there in terms of the changes in stress, in the changes of psychology that's going to be happening, that teachers need to be sort of looking out for, that they should expect? What's your view of how that will shift?
Are you talking about more specifically in terms of teacher stress or in what they're going to see in their cohort of students?
Well, let's do both. Let's start with the
Okay.
teachers. Yep.
I think there may be really complex emotional reactions to returning to school. I think there might be quite differing reactions. I think it might depend a little bit on how teachers perceive their school to be set up to be a safe place to go back to work, whether or not the fear of catching COVID is more exacerbated or whether they're feeling safer. So I think there's going to be quite a range of emotional reactions, and I'd be highly surprised if people went back to school to work with just one emotional reaction. I think people are going to be excited to see their students and joyful to see their students again, and they're going to be grateful that they've got kids in their classrooms, and they're going to look forward to having an opportunity to reconnect with students that they have so much passion for helping and teaching. And I think that's really clear. I think simultaneously there's going to be fear, there's going to be anxiety, there's going to be concern and worry and frustration with the pace of getting systems set up for them. There's going to be this big mixed bag of feelings. And I think where it gets tricky is when we kind of have this headspace that we should feel a thing, and it just doesn't work that way. We feel multiple things simultaneously. And I think that when we feel too many things simultaneously, we often get that sensation of being quite overwhelmed. So I think that overwhelm may be a very big primary emotion for a lot of teachers trying to navigate this system. And I think that there will be both excitement and motivation, and there's going to be exhaustion, and there's going to be fear and worry. And I think that the best possible thing is to name those and say, actually, I do have all of these feelings, and it's okay if they don't make sense, because feelings don't typically make sense. Often we have competing feelings, and it's okay to be both excited and nervous. And I'd like to use the word nerve-sighted, which is like nervous and excited mushed together, and we have to acknowledge that having these multiple feelings simultaneously is actually quite normal. So when you're asking a colleague, or how are you feeling about going back to work next week, I think for them to give you a laundry list of feelings would be a very appropriate reaction.
Yeah, and what about the kids? I mean, what sort of things should we expect? Because I think teachers do a fantastic job on a normal day of the very complex social interactions that occur within the classroom, and the various problems from home that come into the classroom, the various difficulties in learning that some children have, all of the above and more that I've no doubt left out. I mean, what do you expect to be seeing there? I mean, you obviously deal with a lot of kids in your profession, and we've already had term 4 last year. We saw some of this already. What do you think will happen when we go back?
Yeah, I think we're going to probably have another mixed bag. And I think, in the same vein as for teachers, we need to expect a multiple presentation in terms of coming, feelings. And coming back to school is going to be exciting. I can't wait to see my mates. It's also going to be scary. I'm going to be in an environment that I may or may not feel safe in. You've also got the added element now of potential fear or judgment around who has or hasn't been vaccinated that might come into play. I think there's a lot of children who have had a lovely, decent break now. Some who've had less of an exciting break that they would have liked. There have been a lot of holidays that have been cancelled and trips that we haven't been able to go on. So I think we have to be ready for all of those feelings, Shane. We can't, we have to be ready for children who are simultaneously excited and scared, and who feel potentially even unsafe at times, who don't, as adults, we don't really know what the setup's going to really look like. We hear about what it should look like, but the reality check of that may not be the same. So there may be some children who are quite frightened of it. There also might be some children who are a bit oblivious. They're just going back to school and they would care about whether or not they've got a banana or an apple in their lunchbox. So I think we're going to get a bit of a mixed bag. What we do know, though, is it's been 2 years of very disrupted schooling. It's been 2 years where these children are coming at the idea of school and not really knowing whether or not there's going to be a really big academic pressure to catch up. Are they going to be expected to, do all this work that they haven't really had to do for the last 2 years? So what is going to be the primary focus for their teachers? And the more conversations I've had with teachers over especially the last even few days, is we just want the kids to want to be at school. And so I think we need to expect that wide range of that gamut of feelings. I think anxiety is going to be there in part for almost every child. I think there's going to be a lot of that. And the tricky thing with anxiety is it doesn't always look like anxiety. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like school refusal. Sometimes it looks like withdrawing. Sometimes it looks like over talking. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism. So I think it can actually be quite difficult to even identify what feelings our students have, because it can present quite differently in different individuals. It's going to be tricky.
The more I think about how we help teachers with some of this, one of the things that comes to mind is the idea of, taking away some of the unknowns for kids. The one thing that's really been hard, I think, for kids is just the very rapid changes that have occurred in their lives. And, although it seemed like we were in lockdown for quite a while and, kids were doing remote learning for a while, the moment we came back, there was a whole lot of rapid changes and they kept having to adapt and kept having to adapt. How valuable is it in terms of, just making the teaching environment easier for teachers to sort of put forward, a lot of clarity almost every day as to what the expectations are for kids, just so that they do have some things to really connect to, even if it's around curriculum or any of the things that they know for sure. How valuable is it to do that?
So valuable. We know that when we have clarity or we have clear boundaries, we feel safer. So if we can do emails to families, in the early days, even if possible before they return to school, just being really clear about what's going to happen. You're still going to come into the room, hang your bag up, put your morning tea into your tub. You're still going to come for mat time. This is what it's going to look like. Recess is still going to be at recess time. We're going to be able to still play these games, and we're going to read together. Or for primary school years, for your secondary school years, you're still going to move from class to class. You're going to have this available to you. Some clarity about, even if it's things that they've done for the last 5 years, these could be things that we would typically expect most children to expect. So they expect that when they come to school, they hang their bag on a hook or they pop their things in their locker or whatever it might be. Even just reiterating those knowns, those predictabilities will be really, really helpful. That clear boundary on what their expectations are, even if they're just logistical, will be helpful.
With many teachers at the moment, I think there is a feeling that they've kind of been left out of the conversation to a degree. And, you know, we're not here to argue the merits either way on that. But for those who are feeling that way and feeling, you know, a bit thrown under the bus, I suspect, I mean, what can they do to sort of get past that, or at least manage that in a way that, you know, won't really impact them as much day to day? I mean, it's crushing to feel that. It really can be crushing. So what's your advice on that?
That's a tough one. I think it probably depends a little bit on the culture of their school and whether or not speaking up and sharing their concerns about feeling unheard is something that they feel like they can do with their leadership team. If they can, I think they should. So if you are concerned and you are able to voice your concerns with your leadership team, I think that's the best place to start, because that's where you're going to get the most relevant information for your particular school. If that doesn't work, I think that's where colleagues can be handy. So speaking to a colleague about how you're feeling, what's happening for you, you're feeling disempowered or unheard, and seeing if you can have a chat together about where else you may be able to go. Because the reality is there's quite a significant structure in the Department of Education. And so if you're not feeling that you can speak up and share your concerns with your leadership team, I think look at where else you've got to share those concerns. And even if it just starts with sharing those concerns with a colleague, sometimes when we just say our concerns out loud, the colleague may be able to bounce those concerns back and say, hang on a second, actually we do know that, or we know that that's something that we're trying to mitigate that risk, or this is what we're going to do. Hey, don't forget we can still do this. So sometimes even just speaking to a colleague, they may help you to be able to put that concern into perspective about what you do know, which may make it feel a little bit more manageable, which may also then help you to figure out whether or not you could take that new, more manageable sized concern to your leadership team.
Now, teachers on any given day, I think, absorb a certain amount of emotion from the kids in their class. You know, that sort of empathic contagion you can't avoid, right? That you're in the room with them, you seeing them every day of their lives, you're seeing them develop. You take a lot of that on. I mean, we're going to see that on steroids in the coming weeks. Any advice on how teachers can sort of better manage how they handle that?
I think be authentic about it. I think when we try and be positive all the time, children know that you're not being authentic. It's impossible for someone to be happy all the time. So I think you don't have to take on their feelings, and you also don't have to fix their feelings. There's nothing wrong with being stressed or anxious or worried or feeling a bit blue. Those things are okay. So I think that being able to say to a student, I can see that you're really concerned. I can see that you're really worried, and not necessarily feel like you need to take on the responsibility of solving that problem, but rather just hearing it. I think in terms of taking it on, if taking their feelings on ourselves as adults, we're probably less likely to do that if we don't feel like we have to take the responsibility for their feelings in the first place. So if we don't see feelings as positive or negative, and rather we just see feelings as feelings, I think it's easier to not take them on board. So I think that would be my first suggestion. And even to be able to say to students, yeah, I feel that sometimes too. And I think the key is sometimes, because feelings are all temporary. So I sometimes feel really worried about being here too, but then sometimes I feel excited. And does that, do you kind of go through these series of feelings too? Oh, you do. So I think opening these conversations to normalize emotional reactions is actually a really powerful tool, and stops it taking the responsibility of those feelings onto the staff.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Now, the other thing that I suspect a lot of teachers are feeling at the moment is an incredible level of burnout. My guess is partly because last year was really hard to do what we had to do over the last 2 years, really. I should probably correct myself there and say it's hard all the time. It was a lot harder over the last couple of years, and we're about to enter another phase of difficulty again. I think the stress over the break means a lot of teachers probably didn't have the downtime or the relaxation time that they would normally. We rebuild our strength a little bit for another year when we do that. What's your advice in terms of how to deal with this at the moment? Because this feeling of burnout, and I know we hear that term a lot, but it's a real issue, and it's something that I think a lot of teachers starting a new and challenging year are not exactly coming in with a full tank.
Yeah. And where typically teachers would use the summer break to really reset and spend time with their families and their loved ones and come back, revving for the new year, we're just not seeing that. We're seeing a real energy zap that's happened. And, we throw around the words of sort of pandemic fatigue, but I think that that's essentially what's happening for a lot of teachers. I think one of the tricky things about teachers is they're very passionate about their work, and they set themselves really high standards in the type of teaching that they do. They decorate their rooms extraordinarily. They create projects that are next level. The dedication to the job that you see in teachers is remarkable. And one of the things that's going to happen is they may not be able to have that same level of expectation on themselves. That their rooms may not be pristine. They're laminating of gorgeous words around rooms, or science teachers who've put in so much work to create this perfect project. We're going to need to be okay with okay. Rather than having such high standards of ourselves, we're going to need to recognize that we're going into the year with less in the tank, and so we can only spend as much as we have in that tank. We can't keep putting ourselves into a position of a negative energy spending in your day. So be okay with doing the best you can with what you've got, acknowledging the fact you've also probably got families or loved ones that you've also got to look after and be responsible for, not even to mention your own physical and mental health. So you can only give as much as you have, so be okay with that.
It's interesting, when I put up a few ideas here and there, and as soon as things get critiqued, my response is always, nothing here has to be perfect.
Yeah.
We really don't have to aim for perfection every single day. Sometimes good enough is just good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. And especially in an environment where people are so tired, and children don't need the most perfect presentation. They need a teacher who wants to be there. So if that's what you're going to focus on that.
Yeah. Now, Emma-Rose, I want to sort of give you a bit of free rein now to sort of give you a sort of top, I'm not going to say top 10 list, because there might be 8 or there might be 27, but big things that you think teachers can do to help protect themselves, to help keep them above water in the coming months. It's going to be a challenging time. We would hope that parents and other members of our society are more supportive, shall we say, than they sometimes are of our teachers and school staff. But that being said, I know a lot of this is going to fall back on teachers and staff to take care of themselves. So what are your big things? What are the sort of things you'd like to get out there as your recommendations for helping them keep their head above water?
I think the number one has to be the boring basics. So I call them the boring basics because people get sick of hearing about them, and they are kind of boring. And they are: get enough sleep, get some exercise, eat decent food, drink enough water, those sorts of things. Nothing is going to work if your body's not healthy. And we do know that those boring basics are really effective. So probably my number one thing would be do the boring basics. I think the second thing is the concept of connectedness. Now, that looks really different for different people. So whatever that looks like for you, but genuine, authentic connectedness. So see if you can reconnect with the people who make you feel empowered, the people, choose wisely the people that you connect with. Pick the people who you feel supported to be with, the people who make you want to find some of those mini joys, and perhaps limit the people that you connect with that leave you feeling a bit drained after you've seen them. So be wise about who you connect with. I think connectedness is a really powerful one, especially for teachers. I mean, they've chosen a position, a career where connectedness is, what they're doing all day, every day, and they haven't really had that over the last couple of years. I think coming back to why you went into teaching when you very first sat down and decided to enter your teaching undergrad, what is it that you wanted to get out of teaching? Why is it that you chose to go into this particular profession, and keep coming back to your why? I think when we have clarity about why we're trying to do something, it's easier to figure out the what's, and that it's easier to manage the speed humps that happen in terms of actually accessing that sort of final goal. So come back to the why, figure out, sit down, get a bit of paper, scribble down the why, put it in a big bubble in the middle of a page, and write all of the reasons why you went into teaching in the first place, and keep that as a primary focus of what you're trying to achieve. Look for the mini joys. Look for those moments. They're just moments often, Shane, in time. Look for those moments that remind you of that why. Look for the moment when that child had that light bulb moment, or that child who was really, really anxious to come to school was able to drop their shoulders and be confident being there. Look for those little wins that you get and celebrate them. And if you can, celebrate them publicly. Create a wall in the staff room of mini joys. Maybe it was someone brought in a delicious cake. Maybe there was a little academic win. Maybe it was, you actually got to school on time that day. Who knows? I don't know. But celebrate all those mini wins and make it public, and encourage others to do the same. I think be authentic. Be authentic with the feelings that you have, and don't feel that it's wrong to have them, and don't worry if they are counterintuitive. If the feelings seem to be opposite to another feeling you may have, that's okay. And then be comfortable to sit with those feelings rather than feeling like you need to fix them. It's all right to be frustrated and angry and stressed. It doesn't mean that you are therefore a negative person. It means that you're simply experiencing these feelings. So that's another thing. And I guess in that same sort of context, remembering that there's a big difference between feelings and facts. They are not the same. So feeling scared doesn't necessarily mean you're in, actual danger right now. So just being aware that your feelings may not actually be a fact. And that's where I think that connectedness can really help us, because we can do a bit of a fact check, and we can check in with a colleague and make sure that we're on the right page. And I think going back to that sort of earlier conversation we're having is find the things that you can control. Find the things that you feel are going to give you that structure that you need to be able to do your job. So it could be that, in that classroom, here's all the things I can't control, sure, but I can control a lot of the energy of the room. I can control the way we respond to people who are having a difficult day. I can control the way we have an attitude to wearing masks. I've got some control over those things. I've got control over what I teach in my day. Obviously there's a curriculum that needs to be followed, but you've got control over sort of how that's presented. You've got control over how high an expectation you set on yourself. So you actually have a lot of control, and sometimes we need to come back to that. So that certainly wasn't 10.
It's a good number, though.
They're probably my big ones.
Yeah, look, it's a good number. And one of the things I would add to that is just be aware of the things that you're good at that others are not good at, that you take for granted. And this is one of the things I've had the privilege of giving many talks on science in schools. And I will give a talk in front of 1,000 adults, and it doesn't really bother me. I'll do a radio show for a very large audience, and it doesn't really bother me. But I go to a school and I talk in front of 20 year 9 kids, and I'm a tad petrified, I have to say. And I do it for an hour and I walk out exhausted. And then I think teachers are doing that all day, every day in most cases, for months on end. And this is a skill that you need to remind yourself most of us don't have. It is something that takes a lot of capability. And you need to remind yourselves of just how important that is, because even seasoned presenters like myself, do not want to do that. It just feels too hard. It's exhausting, it's tiring, and it requires an incredible level, as you said, Emma-Rose, correctly, connectedness with those individuals in the room. So some of these things I think that, you know, we forget that we're good at. We need to remind ourselves of these skills.
And I think on that topic, one thing that teachers are epically good at is problem solving. They are amazing problem solvers. Their ability to manage the problem solving of, 25 or 30 students at one go is absolutely mind-boggling. So if you've got this brilliant problem solving skill, use that, because I think that is something that teachers have often better than a lot of other populations out there.
Now, Emma-Rose, this may not be our final conversation on this, but we wanted to put this together in the week prior to the return to school, and hopefully share it with as many teachers in the hope it will be a little bit helpful. As I mentioned before, it is not a substitute for professional clinical support, and if you do need that, we both recommend seeking that out through your general practitioner as needed. Emma-Rose, thanks so much for this discussion. It's been fabulous. I hope a lot of school staff and teachers get a lot of value out of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Folks, I'm Dr. Shane from R's science program, Einstein A Go-Go. At this point, we'll sign off. To all the teachers and staff out there, thank you very much for your efforts. And we very much hope that you have a very smooth entry into 2022. We realize there'll be some bumps, but hopefully it will be much better than some of us are anticipating. And above all, you'll get to see the kids that you love teaching the most again, and just focus on that as much as possible. Thanks for watching.